Hey guys, MrPokke here, back with another video, and on today's episode of Early Access Reviews, we are going to be taking a look at our first ever version 3 sustain Hyacine, right? So we are going to be going through her kit, the summary, who should be pulling for her, what are the strengths and weaknesses, should we even consider saving for 3.4, and without further ado, let's get into today's content. So first things first, a summary for Hyacine. She is going to be the first ever version 3 sustain, highest area of effect heals in the entire game via herself as well as Ika. She is going to be providing the perfect synergy for Castorice's sustain slot, arguably being the highest value slot in a Castorice team because she is going to be the fastest new butt generator in the entire server right now. Not only does Hyacine act as sustain, she also doubles up as a sub DPS via Ika. Aside from Castorice, I've also tested Hyacine's versatility with other DPS team comps such as My Day Blade as well as even Acheron with her signature Lightcone, because that does count as a debuff, all of which do have pretty decent performances, especially for players that are still lacking a sustain slot. So in summary, Castorice mains will heavily consider pulling for a Hyacine, but be aware of some potential flaws such as her high skill point consumption as well as weaker single target healing. And with that, we are going to jump into a character kit. She does excel in AoE team-wide healing and cleanse with a supplementary sub DPS capabilities via Ika, especially this is for pretty much any of the DPS we have right now. If you're just talking about Castorice, then the new butt generation is going to be limited only to Castorice because no other sustain can give Castorice this amount of new butt, right? For a basic attack, it's going to be nothing too crazy, but just know that it can also trigger Ika because from the wording, after casting an ability, meaning any basic skill or ultimate can all work the moment Hyacine is in the ultimate state, right? Ideally, however, players shouldn't be using Hyacine's basic attack because it doesn't generate any healing whatsoever, similar to Lingsha's basic attack not having any heals, on top of having 10 lesser energy as compared to using her skill, which means that you might run into an ultimate rotation problem because the ultimate cost is going to be 140. Then jumping to a skill, essentially summoning the Mimo Sprite Ika, it healing the entire team by 8%, it plus 160, and it heals a little bit more for Ika. But essentially what you guys need to understand is that you should be spamming this skill on Hyacine every single turn as much as possible because this is the only ability that can generate you heals outside of using her ultimate, right? Hyacine, as generally speaking, if you're going to be running a outgoing healing chest, it should be roughly 6,000 HP. If you're going to be running a HP chest with a good speed up, roughly 6.5 to 7,000 HP, which puts us at a roughly 680-ish heal for all allies. So if you want to compare this for a HP scaling unit, this amount doesn't really look that crazy, barely 5 to 6% of most HP scalers' total health, but the frequency of this skill makes up for it when it comes to a comfort for a sustained unit, right? And on the same note, if you are looking for a high single target burst heal for units, especially such as My Day, I found that Hyacine's healing is actually not as comfortable because the heals are always directed to the entire team instead of focusing on a single target, such as for example Luocha as well as Gallagher, right? And then jumping into Hyacine's ultimate, you are essentially guaranteed a turn 1 ultimate using her trace after casting a skill because this is going to allow us to enter into ultimate mode immediately, right? After you want to cast the very first ultimate, keep in mind that her ultimate cost is going to be 140. So if you use a skill followed by your Mimo Sprite skill, it will generate 35. But if you use your basic attack in between Hyacine's rotations, it would most likely lead to an ultimate downtime because it will only regenerate 25 energy, right? Keep in mind 20 or 30 is based on Hyacine herself, and every single time Ika moves is an additional 5 energy unless the enemy hits you a lot, which will help you get the 140 limit, right? So you are not actually guaranteed a 3-turn ultimate Hyacine even with energy regeneration rope, but Hyacine does have a Mimo Sprite, so you have a pretty good chance of letting Ika getting hit as well, which could also generate you the additional energy for Hyacine herself. So most of the time, I don't really find this being that big of an issue. You should still be guaranteeing a 3-turn ultimate, even though it's not going to be 100%. It's dependent on whether you get hit on Hyacine or for Ika. This means, however, that Hyacine can be pretty skill point expensive, but most of the time in the current HP scaling meta, it is not that big of a problem because for HP scaling DPS such as Castorice, My Day, or even Blade, they are pretty skill point neutral, if not even potentially a little bit skill point positive, right? But for other DPSs that you're constantly running Hyacine with, then the skill point might be a little bit of a concern because if you're going to be ending up using Hyacine's basic attack, it means that you're almost certainly not getting a 3-turn ultimate, which may potentially bring down the total outgoing healing for your entire team, right? So that is pretty much it. In terms of the healing, it is a little bit 2% more compared to the skill. After Rain is going to be the main gimmick over here because the duration is tied to Hyacine's turn. So the energy regeneration rate for Hyacine is absolutely non-negotiable because Hyacine's speed is going to be incredibly fast. And even on energy regeneration rope plus the 2-piece tree set, I sometimes lack that little bit of energy in order to ensure the 100% uptime. The next line of the max 30% HP buff is going to be based on a character's base HP plus 600, which is a pretty substantial buff. You can take a look at the picture below. Roughly 1200 additional HP to all allies, which helps us scale any HP scaling DPS as well as supports while providing more comfort for our endgame content, right? Then jumping into a talent, it essentially is a very simple 80% damage buff multiplying up to 240%, almost 100% permanent buff uptime after the initial ramp up, which pretty much you can see some of the numbers I've shown you guys over here. Ika hyper carry doing 600,000 damage, which is a little bit ridiculous, right? Always run a HP percentage sphere because the damage will be coming from this specific talent over here, right? And the technique, you don't really need to care about it, just use it. That's pretty much it, right? Then that's pretty much for Hyacine herself. Then jumping into Ika, to summarize everything, Ika essentially doesn't appear on the action value bar despite being a Mimo sprite, unlike Mimi, Garment Maker, or Pollux. Ika will only take action after Hyacine takes action, be it for a basic, skill, or an ultimate via the Ika's Mimo sprite basic attack, right? So this attack, it is based on the total healing done by Ika and Hyacine. Keep in mind, this is not for other units, and after every single hit, it will clear the total healing generated for this attack by 50%. Hence, the very first hit after you heal your entire team will always be the strongest. If you are going to be using another follow-up immediately, such as for example, you cast your ultimate, Ika goes for the basic, and then immediately cast your skill, Ika goes for another basic, then this second basic will always be weaker because you didn't really generate enough heals, right? Afterwards, you want to wait for more heals and you repeat the process, and as long as the battle keeps going on, this damage can reach a very high amount as long as you make sure that the healing done is going to be able to out-heal the amount of healing that's going to be reduced from the tally. Keep in mind, this is going to be 50%, right? Keep in mind, there is a hard limit cap as you keep healing, so it's not going to be an infinite scaling, but it does add up pretty substantially if the battle is going to be dragging on, right? Another line for Ika is if any ally have their HP consumed, be it by the enemies or by themselves, Ika self-consumes its own HP, which can also trigger Castorice's new butt, and it heals all allies based on Hyacine's max HP. This also decreases continuous effects, which includes both buffs and debuffs. Now keep in mind, this continuous effect duration is for the Mimo sprite skill. Ika's actions, they are considered as extra turns, which does not take down the buff or debuff duration, and the line is added over here so that the durations, they do work normally. That's a little bit of mine. And afterwards, we're going to jump into traces. First trace being, I'm pretty sure you guys will look at, oh my god, we're going to get a 400 speed Hyacine. Unfortunately, as of this current point, it is pretty much impossible to hit 400 speed with all of the endgame content unless you're playing Hyacine in Divergent Universe, but maybe in the future, we can look into a little bit more crazy speed buffs, enabling Hyacine to hit 400 speed, right? For now, just keep in mind that 200 speed is going to be the bare minimum to get access to the 20% max HP bars. Other than that, you don't really need to care about hitting any of the 400 speed, right? Just hit 200 speed will be good enough. For the second trace, the effect rest basically doubles her as a healer with built-in cleanse, which should also almost have 100% ultimate on top of the free rest that she's going to be getting, right? So after using skill and ultimate dispel one debuff, pretty much a very comfortable for all of our endgame content. And then for the last trace, this is pretty much what enables Hyacine as well as Ika to deal decent damage, similar to Tribi's sub DPS, but not as crazy as Tribi. And also, she does have a little bit of an emergency heal for units that are in the lower HP category, right? And then that's pretty much it for the minor traces. 10% HP, 14 speed, and 18 effect rest. All of them are very useful. For the skill leveling priority, prioritize your Mimo sprite skill and talent, followed by ultimate, skill, talent, and finally basic. But generally speaking, you should be leveling the entirety of Hyacine's kit aside from basic attack because you want them to provide more healing, more damage, and more support for your entire team, right? So that is essentially the entirety of Hyacine's kit. And the very most important question that I'm pretty sure you guys are wondering is, how do you compare Hyacine with Gallagher, right? So this is gonna be a pretty interesting topic because we have sort of talked about this kind of stuff previously with regards to Ling Sha's access. So is Hyacine gonna be worth an upgrade compared to Gallagher? One of, if not the best 4 stars that we've gotten in Honkai Starbucks, because for pretty much every single team comps, you can run Gallagher as a sustain, be it break, crit, or whatever it is gonna be, right? So I'll be unpacking the extent of her upgrade as well as showing the comparisons I've made between Gallagher and Hyacine for all 3 endgame content across hours of testing. So the first question, is Hyacine actually an upgrade to Gallagher? So to simply put this, absolutely yes for Castorice. And this is not even a matter of like Gallagher versus Lingsha, where there are some areas in which Gallagher is going to be outperforming Lingsha. For example, a little bit more skill point positive, as well as a little bit more single target toughness bar damage, right? Hyacine, when you are going to be taking this into a Castorice team, she is a definitive upgrade in every way over Gallagher for Castorice, because we know by now the entirety of Hyacine's kit is tailor-made to bring out Pollux as fast as possible, while also providing substantial sub-DPS output as well as team-wide HP buffs. For other DPSs, such as for My Day, Blade, or even Acheron, she is still a decent alternative, but not to the scale of Castorice upgrade if you were to pull Hyacine for Castorice, right? Other DPSs, you still do get a little bit of a decent upgrade over older sustains, since her personal damage is always going to be very good, similar to Tribi's personal damage as a sub-DPS or a support, and her overall healing is still one of the highest in all of our limited supports, on top of the cleanse as well as heal frequency when it comes to an area of effect healing, right? Generally speaking, the more niche a team is, the less impactful Hyacine is at filling that niche, since her current best in slot team is already going to be with Castorice. So if you want to run your sustain slots, for example, Avenging for follow-up attacks or Lingsha / Gallagher for soul rate team comps, then you wouldn't really want to pull Hyacine for these kind of teams, right? So that is pretty much it. And the second question is she worth the upgrade? After establishing that she is actually an upgrade, especially for Castorice pullers, and this ultimately would depend on the player's account. But for Castorice players who are locked in for Castorice, like you guys know for a fact you're going to be playing Castorice for a very, very long time, I personally feel that Hyacine is going to be a worthy upgrade, maybe even comparable to Tribi's value. Now, this might sound like a pretty crazy statement, but this is because Castorice, unlike other DPSs, she must have a sustain built into her team comp, right? You can't run Castorice with a 3+1, or you want to run her with a sustainless run, because the entire kit revolves around having a sustain to build up your HP, burn down your HP, and summon Pollux as much as possible. Which means that if you do have an ultra dedicated sustain slot, such as in this case Hyacine, it makes it almost mandatory for every Castorice players if they are thinking about upgrading the team comp for Castorice. The previous notion that I always bring up a lot of times, which is sustains are not as valuable if players already have two, this technically still holds true, and under most circumstances, players shouldn't be thinking about pulling for sustains just for a DPS increase, because your vertical investment into your support as well as your DPS items, it would increase even more damage. But this is not the case for Castorice, right? Because we absolutely have to run a sustain slot for Castorice, and since Hyacine having the kit that she has right now, she would vastly improve Pollux uptime, damage output, as well as her own personal DPS. You can consider this as even like a vertical investment into Castorice's DPS output, and not just from a sustain perspective, right? So in order to help players gain a gauge of what to expect, at least for Castorice teams, I've put together the following performances across all three endgame content using a E0S1 Castorice, E0 S0 Tribi, E6 RMC, E6 Gallagher versus a E0 S0 Hyacine, right? The entire run I did on full auto to reduce the RNG, so do expect further optimizations with manual play as well as better relics in the own account, right? So you can see over here, for Memory of Chaos, I actually tested it for all 4 different stages, right? First half, second half in the current MOC 12, and the first half, second half for the next upcoming MOC 12. Right? You can see over here, for E0 S0 Hyacine, we are going to be going for a 0 cycle for the Pollux, 1 cycle for the TV, and then 2 and 3 cycles for the next MOC 12 respectively. And then for E6 Gallagher, we're going to be doing a 1 cycle followed by a 3 cycle, 4 cycle. So almost across the board, you are going to be reducing 1 entire cycle for your Memory of Chaos rotations, except for the TV boss, which, you know, Gallagher still does very well, tying together with Hyacine for a 1 cycle clear, right? For Apoc Shadows, I did on the first half against the True Swarm-ish, kind of the blue swarm thing. We did get a 3,713 score for Hyacine, whereas for Gallagher, it's going to be 3,575. And lastly, for Pure Fiction, we're going to be doing on the second half Reaver. Both of them actually cleared 40,000 points using 3 cycles, but Gallagher actually almost hit the 4 cycle category, right? So something to keep in mind over there. And hopefully this helps you guys paint a better picture of should you be pulling Hyacine as a upgrade over Gallagher. Because generally speaking, if you take a look at it right now, you probably don't really need it at this current point of time, because Castorice is still going to be extremely strong. But in the future, right? In the future, I'm not saying you need to pull her now, but in the future, if you guys are considering of upgrading Castorice with Hyacine, especially since 3.4 we're going to be getting a fake collab, then I wouldn't think it's a bad idea, especially, you know, with all the brand new bosses, brand new mechanics. Then at that point of time, you can consider getting Hyacine for a Castorice upgrade. So with that out of the way, let's just jump straight into the Lightcone option, and there really is only going to be the Herta signature Lightcone as the best alternative outside of its own signature Lightcone, right? For own signature Lightcone, the general effects are going to be a pretty sizable chunk, right? In summary, 18% speed buff, more HP consumption for charges gained from My Day, Blade, and Castorice, additional damage based on the HP consumed, and a debuff that gives 18% vulnerability for 2 turns. So keep in mind that the HP consumed is actually not that significant, but it is to trigger E-cast healing from HP lost by allies, as you can remember from the kit previously, as long as any of your allies lose HP from any sources. It could be the enemy, it could be themselves, it could even be from this signature Lightcone. It can lead to E-card triggering its own talent, which leads to roughly an additional 10% new buff, especially for units like Castorice, right? So that is going to be a pretty nice upgrade over there. And then for the debuff itself, it does count also as a stack for Acheron/Dreams, so it could be viable to use Hyacine as a replacement for Aventurine or Gallagher, but this is only if you pull for Hyacine signature Lightcone if you want to run her with Acheron, right? And to compare the signature Lightcone with a Herta signature, you can see the difference over here for Hyacine's damage output increase, specifically for Ika. It is going to be a roughly 29 to 48% final damage increase for Ika, depending on how much healing you actually gain. Roughly speaking, it's going to be around an additional 20,000 per hit. So you can see over here, the difference is actually not going to be that crazy, especially if the majority of the damage is still going to be coming from Castorice itself, right? So in the overall value, the signature Lightcone is very, very good, but we do have access to the Herta Lightcone, which is a pretty decent replacement, and I feel that most players, you would suffice with just a free-to-play option because you essentially lose 6 speed as well as the additional charge as well as some damage. Now this is mainly because her Eidolon 1 is disgustingly strong. Far more of an upgrade compared to the signature one because we do have access to the Herta signature Lightcone, right? And to a certain extent, if you want to talk about another alternative, Aglaea's signature Lightcone can also be considered because it is going to be a 12 base speed upgrade, not percentage. It's going to be a 12 base speed, and the E-card itself also deals a pretty significant chunk of damage, and it does tend to gain from the crit damage buff. However, Hyacine generally rotates better by spamming her skills. Like I've mentioned previously, you want to constantly spam this skill in order to get that 3-turn ultimate. So if you're going to be using basic attack with Hyacine, you are most likely going to lead to a 4-turn ultimate scenario, which wouldn't be too ideal to get your ultimate uptime, right? So if that being established, if players do want to give Hyacine the Herta style Lightcone, then Remembrance MC, you can still use the Victory in the Blink and the Memory of Chaos shop just for an alternative, right? Keep in mind, one last thing before I move on is that this signature Lightcone is actually going to be Remembrance MC's best in slot as well, because it also works for Remembrance MC summoning Mimi, which is going to be generating more heals, especially for Castorice teams. So for the whale players out there, you could consider pulling 2 different Hyacine signature Lightcones, one for Hyacine, one for RMC, but keep in mind the debuff itself, it does not stack, but the healing is always going to be generating more value for new butt, right? So with that out of it, let's jump into Hyacine's Relics, but it's honestly very, very straightforward as long as you can hit the 200 speed just to trigger the 20% max HP, right? For your main stats, it's going to be outgoing healing body over HP percentage over crit damage, speed boots, HP sphere, energy regeneration rope, no negotiations, and then for the substats, try to get as much speed as you can, followed by HP as well as crit damage. So healing is always going to be the #1 priority for Hyacine, even though E-card itself, it does do a substantial amount of damage, but it will not be as good as a trade-off because you are going to be sacrificing your HP or outgoing healing boots, right? Like I mentioned, energy regeneration, speed boots, and HP sphere, they are non-negotiable because she cycles very, very quickly. You absolutely want to try to hit the 3-turn ultimate rotation, and she really has a lot of damage percentage from the kit, 240% to be exact, right? Outgoing healing body is actually going to be able to provide you with more heals and more skill usage, but HP main allows her own body to be a little bit tankier and helps Castorice scale a little bit more since she now has more HP to be consumed. But keep in mind, from some rough testing, healing body is actually going to be more damage than crit damage because her healing also scales off of healing output. I don't really think the tankiness for Hyacine, which is going to be a HP main, is going to be a factor. So healing body, generally speaking, is just going to be the better cost because of the ratio of HP consumption to a healing output for new butt is much more healing sided instead of HP sided. So TLDR, outgoing healing body is the best in slot. If you have a HP body with a very, very high speed sub, you could consider running that, but I personally would not run a crit damage body for Hyacine, right? And then for the set bonus, Warrior 4-piece over Speed or Passerby. For the Warrior, it's going to be a brand new set which is going to be introduced in version 3.3. We'll explain this in a future video, but generally speaking, Warrior is perfectly made made for Hyacine. And for players looking to upgrade, there is no better time to farm this brand new 3.3 relics right now, right? And then for the planar ornaments, you can consider 3 set followed by Kill, Vonwag, or Fleetless. So likewise for Warrior, 3 is also perfect for Hyacine with her absurd speed buffs. You can see every single line over there, the requirements of 180 speed is perfectly tailor-made for Hyacine. Other 2 pieces you can also consider as long as you give yourself a team-wide damage buff, such as for example Broken Kill or even Fleetless, right? Personally, I wouldn't really run Luxaka if you're going to be running Hyacine with HP scaling DPS because Luxaka is an attack buff. If you really want that 5% energy regeneration, then Vonwag or even perhaps Panican if you want a parry blade can also be considered, right? So that's pretty much that for the relics. And jumping into the Eidolons, Ika and Hyacine's Eidolons are one of the better, if not one of the best Eidolons in terms of sustained Eidolon, giving both healing utility as well as damage output because of the way her kit functions, right? So this Eidolon 1, when Hyacine is the after range state, increase max HP by an additional 50% and immediately restores HP equal to 8% of Hyacine's max after using an attack. Now this is pretty crazy, especially for the second line. So the first line, it improves the HP bar from the ultimate 30% max HP to 80% max HP, which means more damage for Castorice, Maide, Blade, 3B, as well as even Hyacine herself. The second line is what makes it absolutely ridiculous because this 8% heal, it triggers on any ally that attacks. Yep, not just Hyacine, any ally that attacks. Additional healing, it also allows for even more new buff and sustains for the entire team, inclusive of Ika as well. So this is gonna be a roughly 3 to 5% new buff from every single attack, and with units like 3B spamming her follow-up attacks, you are essentially guaranteeing an almost close to 100% uptime on Pollux, while substantially improving units like Maide's health, since he does need a little bit more heals to get his HP to a closer to full health level, right? If anything, this Eidolon alone, it should guarantee any team in Honkai Starbucks survival and convert for endgame content even outside of the utility provided for units like Castorice as well as Maide. And then for Eidolon 2, you increase your speed by 30% for 2 turns. It does have a potential to reach close to the 400 speed threshold in the future. A 30% speed on 110 base is pretty substantial, which could allow Hyacine to hit the 267 speed threshold to hit 4 turns within a single cycle. Also, you do convert this 30% outgoing healing boost via her tracers because it's going to be a 1-to-1 conversion after your speed exceeds 200. So this Eidolon 2 is pretty decent, but not going to be as crazy as compared to the Eidolon 1 in my opinion. And for Eidolon 4 is pretty much going to be pivoting your main DPS Hyacine while still providing a little bit more of a sub DPS output because you're going to be getting a little bit more crit damage, right? So if you're going to be aiming 400 speed on Hyacine, there's an additional 400% crit damage buff. So your Hyacine in the future at E4, you could see like, I don't know, 600, 700 crit damage, which is just a little bit ridiculous, right? And then finally for Eidolon 6, the classic E6 res pen, but for the entire team, inclusive of Mimo sprites. So this is basically an E1 Tribute or E1 Robin on an E6. But the key thing over here is not really the res pen, but the tally to 12% instead of 50%, which means that your E-card can stack on and is substantially higher damage as the healing stacks on more and more and more going forward. So this is really just for players that want to just see like 1 million, 2 million damage on your E-card burst, then you can consider E6, right? So generally speaking, on E1 versus S1, I just want to add that the value of the Signature Lightcone, it does come from the additional healing trigger for Castorice, so it is going to be up to the players to decide. You can't really go wrong with either choice. S1 is really good for Hyacine and Remembrance Trailblazer, while E1 has a ridiculously higher healing as well as damage output. I personally would feel that E1 has more value than S1 because of the value you're getting from the Herda Store Lightcone. Without the Herda Store Lightcone, then I would say that this Lightcone does offer very good value. And then keep in mind for the Signature Lightcone, Acheron, Maide, and Blade mains, you could consider the Signature Lightcone more than the Eidolon 1 because you do generate more stacks via both the debuff for Acheron as well as the HP burn for Maide and Blade. Keep in mind, this S1 is also very universal because like I mentioned just now, even Remembrance Trailblazer can make use of this Signature Lightcone. So even 2 S1s for wheels can be considered, right? So that's pretty much it for the Eidolon section. And finally, the final segment for Hyacine is gonna be her team comps. Hyacine, just like with most sustains in the game right now, she works with any team if your objective is just to keep your team alive, which she's gonna be perfectly capable of doing. Alright, I play with a very different number of teams, and I will go through some of the more common DPS pairings that players can consider running her with, and including some of the things to look out for, such as her strengths as well as her weaknesses, right? So for Castorice, this is going to be the perfect pairing, and almost every single footage that you guys have seen for the past 20 and 30 minutes, it has been done with the Castorice team in mind, right? I will not really explain this too much anymore. Just know that this is going to be Castorice's best slot sustain for the foreseeable future, right? The additional Mimo Sprite, the health gain, the health burn, AoE team heals, cleanse, sub DPS synergy with Tribi, everything just basically perfectly works together with Castorice all together with Tribi, right? Keep in mind that this rotation, they almost exclusively you want Castorice to always let Pollux go all in, because you gain a ridiculous amount of new buff running highest in the team. So there's almost no situation where you want to hold the Pollux anymore compared to the previous sustains, such as for example Gallagher, right? So not too much to explain here. Castorice is absolutely gonna be the best in slot pickup for Hyacine. And then another HP scaling DPS that comes to mind is going to be My Day, right? So this is gonna be more than sufficient in terms of surviving, and E-cast damage you can range from the 80, 90 or even 100,000, especially compared to with Tribi. But I do want to say that I have a huge concern with My Day, which is the healing received is very little for My Day specifically, right? You can see from the footage and the B-rolls, Hyacine's heals are meant for the entire team, but My Day himself is the one that's gonna be generating most of the damage, right? Especially with his built-in taunt, forcing the enemies to hit him, and most of the units, they aren't really going to be in that much of a pressure compared to, for example, Castorice, which actually burns your entire team, right? So this lack of single target damage healing, it does show a little bit of a weakness for My Day, because if My Day's HP is too low, he can't generate enough charge to cast his God Slayer, because you guys know for now, the 150 charge for God Slayer, it is based on My Day's current health. So the lower the My Day's current health, the less stacks, the less charge he actually gains in order to generate for God Slayer himself, right? So this would not really be that ideal if you want to cast as many God Slayers as possible compared to other sustains such as, for example, Luocha or Gallagher, right? And another HP scaling DPS is going to be Blade. Blade, in my opinion right now, he's pretty much the weaker version of My Day in terms of DPS, but ironically, Blade actually stands to gain more than My Day for Hyacine, because for Blade, he doesn't really care if his HP is going to be high all the time as long as his HP goes down. So this is going to be very easily done with a Hyacine S1. He can still gain charges for his additional follow-up attacks, right? And also keep in mind, we do know for a fact that Blade will be getting a buff in version 3.4, but the information will not be known until the next live stream where Hyacine Better is already over. So for Blade mains who are considering on pulling for Hyacine just for Blade specifically, especially after the buff, I would say you could wait for a potential rerun just to see exactly what the brand new 3.4 Blade is going to be all about, right? And another DPS is pretty much going to be Acheron. Signature Lightcone, in my opinion, is going to be mandatory for Acheron in order for her to gain stacks. But assuming that you do have enough skill point, she is pretty much Acheron's current best in slot sustain, right? Even without a debuff tied to their own kit, the S1 does allow for enough debuff application for on top of the vulnerability to further improve the damage far more compared to Gallagher or even Aventry, including E-cast personal damage. The damage itself coming from an E0 S1 perspective, it is still going to be much more to be desired, and at this point, Acheron itself, it is not going to be able to really keep up with most of our version 3 DPS, but maybe Cypher can fix this Acheron's glaring weakness, which is going to be the lack of a single target damage as of this current moment. So eventually in the future, if you're thinking about the Acheron vertical investments, you still have a Jiao Qiu, you might maybe get a Cypher, and then final is going to be a Hyacine, and then this could bridge the gap for the version 3.0 Acheron to match up with the other version 3 DPS. And then one last team card I want to talk about is going to be the Tribi pairing or the hyper carrying Ika or hyper carrying Hyacine, right? And I tried my hands on this comp, and everybody's gonna be E0, and I can't deny I had a lot of fun with this. As you can see on the goofy art damage, 600,000, everybody's gonna be an E0, right? So for Hyacine and Ika, these two's damage output, it can be very substantial as the fight goes on, but note that if you are gonna be pairing Hyacine with Tribi, the two of them do form a very synergistic combo that can work with almost any remaining 2 slots in any of the team building, right? They buff as well as receive buffs from HP from one another, and both of them, they have an AoE targeting damage, so that Tribi can also gain more damage from Ika's attack frequency and the number of targets hit. And lastly, Hyacine can comfortably sustain the entire team, with Tribi being a tankier support. Now, specific to the hyper carry Hyacine, Sunday and RMC, they both give energy, true damage, and damage buff to Hyacine herself, while she spams the skill to charge E-card and ensure the ultimate state is maintained for as much as possible. And some things to consider in a hyper carry Hyacine team comp is that the RMC's true damage buff, they do wear off pretty quickly since it's going to be tied to Hyacine's turns. And Sunday in this specific run, he is actually not really speed tuned quite fast enough for a hyper speed Sunday to match up with a hyper speed Hyacine. So the best case scenario is that if you have a Sunday that can actually hit a pseudo 200 speed in battle, he can actually match up with Hyacine's damage output, which can generate a lot more actions for a ultra speedy Hyacine, right? At this point of time, the skill point is also a little bit tight with Hyacine and Sunday both spamming their skills. So Tribi basically needs to do their basic attack, and RMC, they have the basic attack in order to maintain the entire team's skill point consumption, which may lead to a slower Mimi uptype. And with that, we've pretty much come to the end of Hyacine's early access reviews. Hopefully, you guys have a better understanding of how she can add value to your account for Castorice mains, Blade mains, Mighty mains, or any of the different mains that you're going to be pulling for, right? So let me know what you guys think in the comments below if you're going to be pulling for her, and hopefully you enjoyed her kit as much as I did, because I think E-card's personal damage, it is a little bit ridiculous and also very, very fun, just very, very fun to play, right? So word of the day is going to be Giga Chonkers. Join Twitch, join YouTube, join Discord, join Twitter, join Twitter. All the best for gacha pools, and I'll see you guys next time.